Welcome to my YouTube channel. My name is Dr. Tony Swaim, and the name of the channel is Talkin' Tunes with Dr. Tony. This is the inaugural edition of my YouTube channel, so I hope you enjoy it. What I'm going to be doing over probably the next 20 minutes or so is referring to some notes I've jotted down. I could speak extemporaneously, but I think that would not be the most efficient way of presenting information to you. So I made some notes and I'll be referring to them from time to time, but I will try to be engaged with my audience as much as possible. So my background, I'm a clinical associate professor at a large public university in the southeastern part of the United States, and I've also been collecting and listening to music for the past 60 years. If my memory serves me well, the first two records that I bought were 45s of You've Lost That Lovin' Feeling, and also Be True to Your School, which had the opposite side of In My Room by the Beach Boys. So that's where I got started. So the purpose of the channel is to create a community of music lovers. And what we'll be doing is we'll be examining recordings that you may know and appreciate, and we'll also be discovering new recordings. What I'd like you to do is a couple things. I'd like you to share this channel with other music lovers that you may know. You may only be a casual a listener or have a casual appreciation of music, and maybe this channel is not really going to be for you, but you may know somebody who classifies themselves as a music addict, which I do. I really have a strong passion for music, so please share the channel with them. And the other thing I'd like you to consider is to create your own YouTube video. So I'm recording this video with my iPhone 11. I'm not using an external microphone. I'm using the microphone that's resident to the phone. I also have a pretty inexpensive box light that I'm using. And other than that, I'm just going with free stuff. So you could probably create your own video in a similar way as I am, and that would increase the pleasure that we have about talking about music. So the inspiration for the channel. There is a fellow YouTuber from the UK who I've been watching, and he closes his eyes and goes to his vinyl record library and just randomly picks 10 records or so, and then he talks about them for like maybe the next 15 minutes. And so this is a spontaneous process, and what's interesting is sometimes he'll pull a recording that he doesn't even remember buying and has never listened to. So that's kind of disappointing for the viewers. There's other people that will only talk about their favorite recordings. Well, I'm doing something that's kind of in the middle, so it's a hybrid. So what I'm doing is I'm creating 4 random numbers every week that correspond to the entries in my Excel spreadsheet where I have all of my vinyl and CDs maintained. And so I take those 4 random numbers and I find the corresponding selections, and those are the ones that I'm going to be talking to you about each week. So it's a hybrid process, and the reason I'm using this is because I like so many different types of music. The random number generator helps me make sure that I'm doing justice to all the selections in my library, because a lot of them get disregarded or not listened to because I just have so many. So that's one thing. And the other thing is it's going to potentially share some new recordings with you that maybe you've never heard about. So I hope that you enjoy that process. That's the process I'll be using. So without any further delay, why don't we go ahead and get into the 4 recordings that I found for this week. The first one is the movie soundtrack to the film Around the World in 80 Days. And this soundtrack was recorded in 1956, and the composer and conductor was a guy named Victor Young. Unfortunately, he died 3.5 weeks after the movie premiere, and this was the last of hundreds of movies that he had wrote music for. Now, this movie, Around the World in 80 Days, won the Academy Award for Best Picture in 1957. So even though I love music, movies come in a close second. And some of my favorite composers are Bernard Herrmann, who composed a lot of music for Alfred Hitchcock movies, Danny Elfman, who's done, I don't know, maybe 40, 50, 60 films or more, Thomas Newman, who recorded the music for Shawshank Redemption and The Road to Perdition, and of course his cousin, Randy Newman, who scored many, many films. And then we'd have to talk about John Williams, who scored many movies as well, the Star Wars and Jaws, for example. So these are some movie music composers you're probably familiar with. So this particular soundtrack is an instrumental soundtrack, and there's a recurring theme that appears in 5 of the different tracks, and this theme was recorded by many other artists, and here's how it goes. Da 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 da. I promise I won't be singing to you very much, but that's the theme, and maybe you're familiar with it. This soundtrack was the second most successful LP of all recordings in 1957, and it was #1 on the Billboard recordings for 10 weeks. So it's a travelogue companion as the main character, Phileas Fogg, who is played by David Niven, travels around the world in a hot air balloon. And as you listen to the soundtrack, it brings to mind the areas of Paris, Spain, India, the Far East, the American West, and the open ocean. So to characterize the music, I would call it light classical, or maybe similar to the Boston Pops, or maybe Gilbert and Sullivan. It was recorded by the Cinema Soundstage Orchestra, and although I listened to the original 1956 recording, which I have on CD, a 2006 version was released that was digitally recorded and included additional music. So the CD version, though, from 1956, I have sounds fine. And one of the benefits of listening to a movie music soundtrack is that it brings back memories of the film. For example, when I first saw The Nightmare Before Christmas, Danny Elfman recorded the music. I stopped on the way home and I bought the music CD of the movie just so I could listen to it, because I love the music so much. Okay, let's go to the second recording selection. It's Ladies of the Canyon by Joni Mitchell. This is Joni's third album. It was recorded during 1969 and 1970 and was released in 1970 by A&M Studios. It was recorded there. It was actually released by Reprise, but it was recorded at A&M Studios in LA. And it was preceded by Clouds in 1969, and then followed by the much heralded album Blue in 1971, which a lot of people believe is Joni Mitchell's best recording. So Joni really released one album per year and during this era, and this shows the commerciality of music. For example, can you imagine one painter just painting and releasing one painting per year? But I guess that the music executives figured that the general public could only handle one record per year. So that's what they did. The consensus rating for this album is 4.5 stars to 5 stars. And it reached number 27 on the Billboard 200 and was certified platinum. So this album reflects the emerging folk rock ambience of Laurel Canyon, which was a refuge above Hollywood in the hills in Los Angeles. And the cover painting is by Joni Mitchell, and it somewhat represents the neighborhood. Joni plays a lot of piano on this recording for the first time. As a matter of fact, of the 12 selections, she plays piano on 6 of them. And then, of course, she plays acoustic guitar. Her voice was still beautiful and pure. It was untouched by the ravages of her cigarette smoking that followed even to this day. And Joni referred to herself as the last of the big-time smokers. So she was actually proud of being a cigarette smoker, even though it did mess with her voice. Now, there's no guest artists that are cited on the LP, but Crosby, Stills, and Nash provides backup vocals, and Paul Horn plays clarinet, and Jim Horn, no relation, plays baritone saxophone. So the songs were written between 1969 and 1979, and there's not a dog among the 12 selections, in my opinion. It starts off with Morning Morgantown, and then the next track is For Free, which was later covered by David Crosby on the Byrds reunion album. And then it ends with arguably 3 of Joni's best selections. Now, if any artist would have just had one of these selections in his or her career, that would have been a substantial accomplishment. But the fact that she had 3 in a row at the end of the album is amazing. So the first one is Big Yellow Taxi. The second one is Woodstock. And the third one is The Circle Game. Now, regarding Woodstock, Joni did not play that song at the Woodstock Music Festival, although you may know that Crosby, Stills, Nash & Young recorded a much changed version, electrified version on the Deja Vu album. But then Joni did play that song 1 month later after the Woodstock Festival. She played it at the Big Sur Music Festival in California. And then, so this album really represents a transitional album for Joni. Remember, it's her 3rd album, and it culminated in her 6th studio album, which is Chord and Spark in 1974, which was a critical and commercial success, and many people believe that is Joni's finest hour. After Chord and Spark, Joni recorded 13 albums from 1975 to 2007, and these albums represented excursions into jazz, rock, pop, and ballads. And I may have an opportunity to talk about some of Joni's other albums later on, because she's definitely, I would consider her one of my favorite female artists, along with probably Ella Fitzgerald. Those are my 2 favorites. Okay, moving right along, the 3rd recording is Al Jarreau, The Best Of. And this is a compilation album. I have quite a few compilation recordings in my library. This one was released in 1996 and includes songs from 1976 to 1996. Now, if you're not familiar with Al Jarreau, think of him as Bill Withers having too much caffeine. In fact, Al recorded an album called A Tribute to Bill Withers in 1998. Al's style is smooth jazz, blues, and R&B with heavy emphasis on improvisation. His own type of scat singing, and he had very interesting physical gestures while performing live. This album features Bill Champlin, Steve Lukather, Jeff Porcaro, Chuck Finley, and George Duke. And the standout tracks for me are 3 classics and 1 novelty song. So the first classic is Compared to What, which was popularized by Les McCann and Eddie Harris in 1971. Al's rendition, aside from the introduction, is pretty faithful to that recording. Then the second one is the most popular jazz tune of all time, Take 5 by the Dave Brubeck Quartet. And what Al does here is he doesn't use any actual words. He adds sounds, vocalizations to the original, because the original was all instrumental, which is pretty cool. And then the third classic selection is Spain, written by Chick Corea and recorded on the first Return to Forever album in 1972 called Light as a Feather. That recording on the original album had vocals by Flora Purim, but Al adds more vocals to that recording. And lastly is the theme song from the television show Moonlighting. This theme song was released in 1987 and produced by the renowned artist Nile Rodgers. So Al Jarreau died in 2017 at the age of 77, but he won a Grammy in 1982 as the best male vocal pop performance. So the last recording is an album called Weather Report by the band Weather Report. And this recording is somewhat strange in more ways than one. Even though it is Weather Report's 10th studio album, it has the same name as their very first album released in 1971. This 10th recording came out in 1982 and it charted number 5 on the US jazz charts in that year. It represents the last album of the classic Weather Report lineup, which consisted of Joe Zawinul on keyboards, Wayne Shorter on saxophone, Jaco Pastorius on bass, and Peter Erskine on drums. And if you're not familiar with Weather Report, they are a jazz fusion band, and they're considered one of the big 3 jazz fusion groups of all time, along with Return to Forever and the Mahavishnu Orchestra. So this 10th album is fairly representative of their previous 9 recordings. Melodies are few and far between, and frequently their songs, they begin slowly with some rhythm and maybe just some muted keyboard and sax parts and bass, and then they start to build into a climax with a real swinging rhythm, and then they just kind of descend and end. So Joe Zawinul's keyboards really dominate this recording to a large extent, and he wrote most of the songs. Jaco Pastorius' bass playing is actually underrepresented compared to the other Weather Report albums that he was on, and it's sad to think that 5 years after this album was released, Jaco was beaten to death outside of a bar outside of Fort Lauderdale, Florida. And Jaco had been suffering with mental illness for a few years and was actually homeless, and he was really rowdy and drunk. And the bouncer threw him out, and the bouncer had training in martial arts, and Jaco died a few days later in the hospital, which was really a sad story. So getting back to the album, the centerpiece is called NYC, and that's made up of 3 compositions: 41st Parallel, The Dance, and Crazy About Jazz. And the NYC is designed to emulate the typical Manhattan experience. There is a Jaco Pastorius composition called Speechless, which is probably the most accessible tune on that album, and it's reminiscent of a song called A Remark You Made that's on Heavy Weather, which is a great song. The album is heavy on percussion, and it can benefit by multiple listenings for sure, because it is not an easy listening experience. So if you're new to Weather Report, I recommend that you give a listen to Heavy Weather or Mr. Gone, as they are much better selections. So this wraps up my first edition. I hope that you'll post some comments for the video, and also that you'll subscribe and you'll like it. And also, please tell a friend about the channel, Talkin Tunes with Dr. Tony. I'll talk to you later, and I hope all of you have a blessed day.